Good evening, everybody. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick. It's wonderful to be with you again on this, our 27th program in this America at a Crossroads series. Tonight, we are especially honored to present not one, but two extraordinary American heroes, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman and historian and journalist Max Boot. They will be in conversation about the price paid by a military man in the era of Trump. Our program tonight is being recorded by C-SPAN, whom we welcome into our Zoom room. This series was created as a joint venture between Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc. Jews United, or JUDGE, was started after President Trump's first Muslim ban, which we found to be abhorrent and in violation of our understanding of American democracy and in contravention to our Jewish values. Community Advocates, Inc. was established by David Lehrer and Mayor Richard Reardon 2 decades ago as a vehicle to fight for civil discourse and protection of our democratic ideals. It is a great partnership which has been able to bring you 27 outstanding programs with America's A-list thinkers. We are all volunteering our time and greatly appreciate our audience support and expressions of appreciation. I welcome you tonight on behalf of Xavier Oslovsky, Mel Levine, Caroline Kelly, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and David Lehrer, the leadership team of Jews United for Democracy and Justice. Thank you to our many wonderful co-sponsors, Temple Isaiah, Stephen Wise Temple, Valley Beth Shalom, Temple Beth Am, Leo Beck Temple, ECAR, Temple Israel of Hollywood, Jewish Center for Justice, and the Holocaust Museum, LA. Just a reminder, next week we present former Obama Chief Advisor, the outstanding David Axelrod, at our regular time, Wednesday at 5. Then on November 2nd from 5 to 7, we have an amazing 2-hour program with a rotating cast of 6 brilliant panelists. They will tell us what will happen and what will it mean. And in November, we will host Bill Kristol, Ron Brownstein, and George Will on 3 separate Wednesdays to help us understand what has happened in the election. And then we launch December with Congressman Adam Schiff. I want to conclude my welcoming remarks with a special comment about our 2 guests tonight. Xavier Oslovsky and I, and no doubt many others at this town hall tonight, spent much of our early lives fighting for the release of Jews from the Soviet Union. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, Zev was a national activist leader, and in the latter half of the 70s, I led LA's Soviet Jewry efforts. In addition to our political advocacy and activism, we traveled to the Soviet Union to visit refuseniks and to buoy their spirits and to bring back their stories to buoy the movement. It gives us special pride to be able to host 2 incredible men who were born in the Soviet Union and whose families were able to emigrate due to the efforts of that Soviet Jewry movement. We are so grateful to have you here with us tonight. Now, to further introduce our speakers, please welcome Community Advocates Inc.'s David Lehrer, a great leader and a great partner and a great friend.
Thank you, Janice. On behalf of Community Advocates, I am pleased to join in welcoming you all once again to our virtual town hall with a record nearly 5,500 registrants. Our audience is now bridging oceans. Last night's program had viewers from Melbourne, Australia to Chandler, Arizona, from San Miguel de Allende, Mexico to Vancouver, British Columbia, from Conshohocken, Pennsylvania to Aiya, Hawaii. Clearly, there is a desire for intelligent analysis and honest discussion, and it's worldwide. Tonight, we're again offering 2 world-class analysts and then some. And I can't help but comment that our special guest, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, stands out in today's America as a hero. He's one of the few individuals on the national scene to have exhibited courage in the face of tyranny and wrongdoing. Where countless politicians cowered and hid when confronted by Trump's bullying and threats, though they had little to lose, our speaker bravely spoke up when he witnessed wrongdoing, knowing full well that his career was in jeopardy. He took a stand when countless others said and did nothing, though they knew the venal character of Trump and what the consequences of their inaction was to our nation. You are about to hear from a brave man who did the right thing at the right time and for all the right reasons. Max Boot is making his 3rd appearance in our series. He's a respected historian, best-selling author, and foreign policy analyst. He's been called one of the world's leading authorities on armed conflict. He is the Jean J. Kirkpatrick Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, a columnist for the Washington Post, and an analyst for CNN. Max will introduce his friend and our guest speaker, Lieutenant Colonel Alex Vindman, to discuss a military man in the era of Trump, paying the price. Max?
Thank you very much, David, and I fully echo everything that you said about Alex being a hero. Now, just very briefly, Alex was born in 1975 in what was then the Soviet Union in Kiev, in Ukraine. He and his family came here in 1979. He grew up in New York City, where I'm speaking to you from. He graduated from SUNY Binghamton and joined the U.S. Army as a second lieutenant in infantry. He subsequently served in a variety of assignments in places like Korea and Germany. He was deployed to Iraq and in 2004 was wounded in action, earned a Purple Heart. Then in 2008, he moved from infantry to become a foreign area officer, specializing in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. He spent time at the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. He got an MA from Harvard, and then he was an assistant army attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Moscow from 2012 to 2015. Then he was a political military advisor on Russia to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And in 2018, he was assigned to the National Security Council as director for Eastern European, Caucasus, and Russian affairs. And of course, this is where he achieved worldwide fame. It was almost a year ago, on November 19 of last year, that Alex testified before the Senate, before the House Intelligence Committee, about what transpired on a phone call between President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. Now, when as Alex testified, when he first heard that call and when he was listening in on it, he thought it was deeply troubling. That what was happening was very improper, and he reported that up his chain of command. And then subsequently, when he was subpoenaed to testify before the House, he did so and testified truthfully and honestly, but at great personal risk to himself. And I guess my first question for you, Alex, is: did you have any idea what would happen when you first referred your concerns about Trump's call with Zelensky up the chain of command, and then when you agreed to testify, did you hesitate? I mean, you must have realized that you were going against the most powerful man in the country, your commander in chief. He would be deeply unhappy about your testimony. There are a lot of military officers who would choose to stay out of the line of fire, but you advanced to the sound of the gun. So was that a hard decision for you?
Hey, Max, thank you, first of all, for being part of this discussion. And I'm privileged to have you be my, I guess, interviewer. And thank you, Janice and David, for hosting me. It's a kind of unique opportunity to join this really illustrious group of guests that you've had rotate through. And it's an opportunity to kind of share a little bit about what had transpired. So to answer your question, Max, I'd say I had little to no concern in making my initial report to the proper authorities within the National Security Council. You have to understand, from my perspective, I'd been watching this kind of slow moving car crash for several months. It became clear that there were some oddities with regards to Ukraine policy as early as March, when the former mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, started to advance some sort of narrative about Ukrainian interference and corruption on the part of the exceptional ambassador Maria Yovanovitch, and that continued to devolve, frankly, over the subsequent months, all the way through President Zelensky and his election victory, the inauguration that I attended in the May timeframe, really all the way through. It started to come to a head in early June, about 2 weeks before, when the Ukrainian National Security Advisor came through, and Donald Sondland actually offered this kind of quid pro quo type of transaction, at which point I reported that also. A lot of people don't necessarily remember or recall that. And then, so it really made it was straightforward. What was obviously troubling is, in this case, is I tried to dissociate, maybe because of my military training and high regard for the office of the presidency, I try to dissociate the fact that the president was personally involved, but that was obviously absolutely apparent in that call on July 25th. So nobody in the United States is above the law. I shared my concerns in the hope that the proper authorities could right the ship and get us back on course. And ultimately, so there was no hesitation there. And then with regards to the testimony itself, I would say I obviously knew the consequences or suspected them, hoping that I wouldn't be kind of a victim of retaliation. But I had high suspicion that this was going to be highly problematic, a lot of risk, potentially ending my career. But what were my options really? I could have, I guess, reversed course somehow, and basically went back on my initial concerns. That was not a viable option for me. I could have shirked my duties and responsibilities as a military officer, and not appeared before a co-equal branch of government pursuant to a subpoena. None of these were really viable options, and I never really considered, unless the president gave me a direct order in which it would have to play out in the courts, I never considered not appearing before Congress and testifying. I just, that's not the country I live in, as far as I'm concerned, and there was no chance that I was not going to do my duty in this case.
Now, the most memorable part of your opening statement was where you addressed your father and his concerns about what you were doing, where you said, "Dad, I'm sitting here today in the U.S. Capitol talking to our elected professionals. That's proof that you made the right decision 40 years ago to leave the Soviet Union and come here to the United States of America in search for a better life for our family. Do not worry. I will be fine for telling the truth." Do you still feel that way? Do you still feel like you're fine for telling the truth? Because you have suffered real retaliation. You've been fired from the NSC. You've had to retire early from the Army as a lieutenant colonel, not as you weren't promoted to colonel as you deserved to be. Your brother was fired from the NSC along with you. Your wife has talked about the threats that your family has faced. Do you still feel like that you're fine and that this experience is a vindication of the American system?
In a lot of ways, there was certainly the failure of of Congress as a whole to enforce accountability and I guess pursue justice. But that wasn't my role. My role was relatively straightforward. I was a witness called to testify based on a fact witness based on what I observed. And going into the both the closed door testimony and the public testimony on the 19th of November, there was little doubt that I was going to face some retaliation. At that point, I actually had faced retaliation. I was already ostracized by kind of the senior political leadership and excluded from certain activities, having proven myself as either disloyal or politically unreliable to the president, which the military, we don't swear an oath to the president, we swear an oath to the Constitution. So I knew what I was getting into, and every word in my statement was very, very carefully reviewed and parsed. I wished I had rehearsed it like my wife suggested, because I meant to say elected, not elected professionals. I meant to say elected officials, but I couldn't get it out right because I failed to rehearse it. But so I knew what I was saying. And
professionals was definitely the wrong word because they were very unprofessional, but go ahead.
What I was alluding to is the fact that we live in a very different country than where we came from, the Soviet Union, where the stakes were much higher. And I was alluding to the fact that ultimately, in the long run, I would be fine. I had really few misconceptions that it would be a rocky road for the foreseeable future. I had no plans to leave the military. I did ultimately end up leaving due to kind of a campaign of bullying and retaliation, intimidation. But I was referring to the fact that I'd be okay in the long term. My dad came here at the age of 47 with $750, 3 young sons and a mother-in-law, and he managed to do fine with much harder a road ahead of him. And that's what I had trust in the fact that I'd be fine in the long run, and I will be.
How does it feel to have been, uh, rocketed so quickly to so much fame and notoriety? And in particular, I mean, it was just so appalling to me watching your testimony, which was self-evidently truthful, to see the way that you were smeared and vilified by so many Republicans, having Republican members of Congress questioning their loyalty to America, which was truly sickening for somebody like you, who's earned a Purple Heart for our country. Having, Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary, calling you a junior employee, having, Trump himself, the president of the United States, attack you as a quote never Trumper, which I guess he considers to be an insult, which I consider to be a badge of honor. But also, when he fired you from the NSC, sending out this mendacious tweet about how you were supposedly given a horrendous report by your superior, that you had problems with judgment, wouldn't adhere to the chain of command, all these lies, which, the kind of stuff that we're used to seeing from, internet trolls. But this is the president of the United States saying this, the person who at that time was still your commander in chief. I mean, that just must have been a very surreal experience. I can't imagine what that's like. I mean, did you feel personally threatened? Did you feel like your life and your family's life was at stake here? What, I mean, I just can't imagine what that experience was like.
So I will tell you that I've been through tougher situations. I've deployed to combat. I lived 3 years in Moscow in kind of the one of the more high stakes geopolitical games, where the high stakes geopolitical games are played, and that you have the entire security apparatus oriented against you as an attaché. And my wife and I have been through our own challenges. She spoke about those recently, with regards to trying to have a bigger family. So in the big scheme of things, I tend to not really focus on the bad things. I mean, the president of the United States, I separate the office from the person. I really hate referring to him as President Trump because he doesn't deserve that title in my mind. Yes, he won an election, but he's proven you have to earn respect, and he's done the exact opposite. So I have little regard for him, little regard for the officials that he put in high office, because they're unqualified and frankly oftentimes incompetent. So in a lot of ways, I actually take it as a badge of honor when I get attacked by these folks, with their completely specious claims about me and my character, because I hold little regard for them. The people that I do hold high regard for like Chairman Dunford, in his last, I think, day in uniform, he basically put out some. He made it a point to speak to Barbara Starr and put some information out through CNN. Testing to my qualities, my positive qualities. That means so much more to me than what comes out of the president of his own mouth or his tweets or any of his proxies. I mean, day to day we see that he and his team of sycophants probably are just spreading disinformation, lying, and in fact undermining, doing almost everything they can to undermine elections, hence undermining the very kind of foundation of our democracy. So it doesn't really bother me. With regards to the threats, maybe I'll say that my daughter says that my wife is in charge of safety, I'm in charge of fun. So she pays attention a lot more closely to these things than I do. Like I said, I've kind of lived in challenging places, and I can generally hold my own. But it is quite disconcerting to have hate mail and threats come to the house, meaning clearly that people know how to find us. So that was a problem, and we were prepared to, at various times, to potentially move on to an installation. We had increased force protection, kind of basic due diligence for safety. but we tried to live our life, as much as we could normally, given the stressful situation.
It's a disgrace that you had to endure all that because you testified truthfully. What do you think about people like John Bolton, who refused to testify but could have added to the case against Trump? And what do you think about all of the Republican members of Congress who heard all the evidence and then just chose to disregard it and voted to acquit, even though the evidence was overwhelming that Trump was guilty of the very high crimes and misdemeanors of which he was accused?
It's what I find interesting and a little bit, I guess I could take solace in the fact that these people have to ultimately live with their decisions. I could speak about myself and why I chose to do my duty. I knew what the right thing was to do was. I knew that I would have to live with myself if I somehow didn't do the right thing. I knew that I would have to look my daughter in her eyes when she gets older and understands what's going on, and that I could have made a difference, and I was not going to dishonor our family by shirking my responsibility. These folks that fail to do that will have to ultimately live with the consequences of their actions. Some of them might not even feel bad about it. I mean, frankly, some of these folks are very self-serving and looking to profit, and I guess they'll be fine. They'll be fine even if they're kind of vilified and damned, by the public. But I think there probably will be enough people that will suffer consequences as a result of shirking their responsibilities. We'll see that in the upcoming election within a couple of weeks. That a number of people will lose their office, and for the rest of them that stay in that shirk their responsibility will have that. Basically, they'll have that around their. It'll be a sign around them for the rest of their careers. So I'll just leave it at that.
Now, you mentioned the support that you received from General Dunford, the outgoing chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but I'd be curious in general for how much support did you receive from the Army, from DoD in general, from Secretary of Defense Esper, from General Milley, who replaced General Dunford? Did you feel like the building, as people call the Pentagon, was the building behind you as you were being vilified and ostracized by the President of the United States? Or did they leave a wounded man on the battlefield and abandon you and under attack from the president?
Sure. So that's there's some nuance to, I guess, answering this question. The bottom line is no. I never felt like I had any kind of support or backing. But I guess the question is, who is to blame? In part, I guess the military, the defense officials, the Department of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the chief of staff of the Army. As leaders, they have some responsibility. But frankly, it goes back to the president and the kind of environment that he's bred in government for the past 4 years, just about. Our institutions that have kind of kept us as strong as we have been under attack. It started probably with the Department of Justice, Homeland Security, the intel community, State Department, and ultimately, frankly, because of me, the Department of Defense was drawn in, and these officials fundamentally had to kind of make a choice between catering to their fears, succumbing to concerns over what the president might do if they stood behind me back and supported me, or kept quiet. And ultimately, they decided to preserve their own positions, whether that's to be in office as guardrail, which is probably what they have in mind, that somehow they'll be in a position to stem the most egregious activities of this president. But I think there's equal part, at least, that these individuals were looking to secure their own position and just did not want to risk kind of the venal, vindictive backlash from President Trump, and therefore I was easy kind of pawn to sacrifice in their mind, and I think it's worth mentioning that in fact it's a slippery slope with this president, and if you don't stand your ground, you're likely the president is likely to pursue his agenda more aggressively. And we may have seen that play out, frankly, in Lafayette Park, when the president pulled in Secretary Esper and the Chairman Milley to back him as he pushed peaceful protesters, used violence against peaceful protesters for what amounted to a political ad. If they had stood their ground, maybe that in my case, that may have not happened. Who knows?
That's a great point. Now, traditionally, the military is a very Republican group, and I'm guessing you probably have been a Republican as well. Is that right?
I actually would say that, you know, the I would describe it as the military tends to run more conservative.
Right.
There's a large contingent that comes out of the southern states that tends to be, they're representative of kind of where they originate from, and in that regard, it tends to run more conservative. But politics don't end up playing a significant role. I mean, frankly, I had no idea what the political affiliation of my peers, subordinates, seniors were, what their political affiliation was, and I'm guessing they didn't have any clear clue of my own. My own background, and I grew up in New York City, so when I registered at the age of 18, I registered as a Democrat. I would say I was not an active during the course of my military career. I was not an active participant in politics. I took the concept of an apolitical military very, very seriously. And frankly, if the president hadn't pulled me into politics, if the president hadn't politicized me, I would have stayed in that space. But the president did attack me. He gave me a voice, and I had actually seen behind the curtain, and I see this as part of my duty, basically speaking up and attesting to the foreign policy failures, the personal failures of the president, and if I have any role, if I could play any constructive role, have any kind of impact on the upcoming elections, I will do that. And that's frankly way outside my comfort zone. I'm not interested in a lot of media engagements, but I had to get comfortable with it pretty quickly, starting in September, and telling my story, and our family telling the story, so like this, the American public could see what the costs are for faithful public servants, and any indication to that the next 4 years would be better is misplaced. If anything, it's going to be significantly worse, because there's not the guardrail of another term, another election. And I think people should just know that when they go vote.
What's your view of people much more senior to you, folks like General Jim Mattis or General John Kelly or General H.R. McMaster or former Senator in DNI Dan Coates and others who clearly have been just as appalled as you are by President Trump's misconduct, but they're not out here. They're not joining us tonight. They're not speaking out. They're not campaigning against Trump. They're not trying to alert the American people to the danger. I mean, these are folks who have a lot less to lose than you do. These are all retired generals, retired senators. They're set. Nothing can possibly happen to them. They don't have careers to pursue anymore, and yet they're choosing to stay silent. I mean, what's your view of that?
So I maybe I don't have particularly kind of kind sentiment in this regard. I frankly see it as self-preservation. Military officers, especially senior military officers, their entire career they think about preserving options. You want as many options as possible for whatever fight you're going to get engage in. And I think that they're basically sticking to that kind of notion that they don't want to burn any bridges. They don't want to come down as a Democrat or a Republican. They don't want to limit their financial opportunities. They've worked 30, 40 years in government. This is that time that they could improve the lot of their family. And they basically, they in certain regards, maybe lost sight of the fact that they have an opportunity to continue to serve in private, serve the public. And I see this, I see my role in public service continuing. I don't know, I don't frankly understand why they're not speaking up. They've lived a set of values for decades. They know what right and wrong is. The only thing that seems to suggest why they're not speaking up is, again, self-preservation, self-enrichment. It's not necessarily a kind sentiment, but frankly, that's the way I see it. I think it's this idea of apolitical military. Apolitical military is absolutely valid. Once you hang up your uniform, you're still a leader, and you have an ability to make an impact. You shouldn't. I guess you shouldn't abrogate that responsibility.
I want to turn to what could be the $64 billion question here, which people have been asking for a long time, and to which I still have not heard a straight answer. The question essentially being, what is it with Trump and Russia, and particularly with Trump and Putin? I mean, Dan Coates was actually quoted by Bob Woodward as saying that he thinks that Putin has something on Trump. I mean, is that something that you think, or how do you explain the fact that that Trump attacks pretty much everybody in the universe except for Vladimir Putin, and to whom he is utterly obsequious? Why is that?
It is the $64 billion question. I think I certainly have heard people speculate about the kind of compromising material that Vladimir Putin might have on him. But I guess I take an analytical approach, and I've determined that he doesn't need compromise. What he has is a willing participant in the form of Trump, who is a fanboy. He's a Putin fanboy. He admires him. He's admired him for a long time. He admires him because of who Putin is and the power he wields without any kind of check. And I think in a lot of ways, Trump would like to be the same kind of figure. He's just not as competent, and doesn't have the wherewithal to do that. So what Putin has is, and I've described him as both a useful idiot and a fellow traveler, in an article in the Atlantic. And the useful idiot is that, frankly, he doesn't know that he's advancing Putin's interests. He doesn't know that basically in carrying Putin's water, he's undermining the credibility and the trust and the effectiveness of the intelligence community. When in Helsinki, he basically took the word of Putin over his, the concerted and consensus view of his intelligence community. And he, frankly, is a useful idiot in taking already divisive issues and using them to drive larger wedges within U.S. society. And a fellow traveler is really, I mean, that's I guess so, only in that he wants to be an authoritarian leader, and he's going to do everything he can in the next 4 years if he's elected to be an authoritarian leader. That's his view of how power should be wielded, and compromising material is not necessarily useful. Also, with somebody like Trump, who's so erratic and impulsive, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the Russians to try to use leverage in that way against him, because who knows what he can say. The whole thing could blow up in the Russian's face, in the FSB's face, if the president were to say yes, accidentally say that the Russians have something on me. So it doesn't make sense for them to use information like that. They have easier levers.
What do you make about this pseudo scandal that Trump is now and Rudy Giuliani are now trying to generate about Hunter Biden's emails? I mean, to me, it looks like just a continuation of the scam that you blew the whistle on, that they were trying to run last year, trying to get the Ukrainian government under threat of losing U.S. aid to come up with some kind of compromise on Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. And obviously that blew up in their face, and Trump got impeached. But now he seems to be trying the same thing. And, so you have the New York Post throwing out these emails of dubious authenticity that have not been verified, claiming to be from Hunter Biden. Now, frankly, I have to say, even if they're true, I'm not sure I see the scandal here, because fundamentally, there's no evidence that Joe Biden in office did anything to help Hunter Biden in the actions that he took in Ukraine getting Victor Shokin, the corrupt prosecutor, fired. That was what the U.S. government and the international community thought should be done. And Victor Shokin was not investigating Burisma. But nevertheless, you have Trump and Rudy and Fox and their whole gang trying to make this the greatest political scandal in history. And of course, the whole time, Rudy is working with people like Andrei Derkach, this Ukrainian lawmaker who has been designated a Russian agent by Trump's own Treasury Department. So, but there's just like so much coming at us from places like the New York Post, Breitbart, Fox News, and they're desperate, obviously, with only a few days left before the election. What's your analysis of this attempt to create a scandal?
Sure. So it's interesting. I think this also falls on the shoulders of Congress and its failure, especially the Senate, because if the president was even censured for this enterprise, he wouldn't have pulled the same thing now, basically fabricating some sort of false narrative of corruption with Vice President Biden. I'll tell you, I looked at this matter pretty closely. I looked at it starting probably in the March-April timeframe of 2019 as things started to unfold, and relatively quickly dismissed it. I kept asking probing questions from the right people, the true subject matter experts within the intelligence community, within the State Department, of the country team, so the embassy, and there was no real substance to it. And it was pretty clear that when Burisma and the Ukrainian government reported that the Burisma servers were hacked and that information was stolen, this was, months and many months ago. I think it might have been at the beginning of this year, end of last year. It was pretty clear how this information was going to be used. So all the experts were like, okay, clearly this is going to be something that is going to be rolled out in the campaign, late in the campaign. The sad thing is that if this is the October surprise, if this is supposed to be what helps get President Trump past the goal line, I don't think anybody cares. Nobody's paying attention to that. The president has been responsible.
Except for Sean Hannity's paying attention.
But you know what? The average American isn't. It's the average
American who doesn't watch Fox News, for sure. Yeah.
Well, even so, I think when people go to there's a hardcore constituency that's going to back the president no matter what, but that's not going to be the portion of the electorate that's actually going to get him a second term. The vast majority, the part of America that's going to actually bring in a new administration is the one that's going to understand, realize that more than 220,000 Americans have died because of the president's mismanagement of this pandemic and his mismanagement, the consequences of the pandemic and the economic catastrophe that's befallen the United States. And people feel this. I mean, I went to visit my Rachel's grandmother, 94-year-old grandmother in Middle America in Oklahoma, and even there, people are wearing masks and people are feeling the effects of the coronavirus. It did not magically go away like the president suggested it was going to. So the distractions of this specious kind of fabricated narrative of this computer, which there's no provenance, no clear connection to Hunter Biden. As a matter of fact, I think the FBI has already kind of said that it looks like it's likely connected. And you have Radcliffe, who I experienced firsthand, kind of a smarmy political figure that's really just now acting as not as the DNI protecting United States interests, but carrying the president's water, basically perpetuating this false narrative. So I guess fundamentally there's the people that are going to pay attention, or the people that this is going to be meaningful to, we're not going to be swayed off of voting for President Trump. So I guess Fox has locked in, that 35% of the population that is hardcore Trump supporters. But again, that's not going to be enough to get the president across the goal line. And I want to reiterate one more time that there's just not anything credible to substantiate that these are legitimate accusations against Hunter Biden, who I think, frankly, had a major lapse and error in judgment in basically profiting off of his father's position and enriching himself. That's that to not realize kind of the potential harm that could do to the vice president is that's a terrible lapse in judgment. But that's, I guess, for Vice President Biden and Hunter Biden to work out, and he seems like a just a wonderful, loving father, and I'm sure they'll get past that. But that's really all there is to it.
I want to ask one more question and then turn it over to some audience questions. But my final question to you is, what do you think is the Russian game plan for this election? We just had a report in the New York Times today based on sources in the U.S. intelligence community saying that the Russians are hacking into election infrastructure at the state and local level. Of course, yesterday we had Radcliffe, who, as you mentioned, is a political hack, and Trump toady, basically pointing the finger of blame at Iran for a particular information operation and trying to suggest that Iran and China are the real threats to the election, and they're supposedly backing Biden. But clearly, the intelligence community is screaming as loud as they can that no, Russia is the real threat, and they're trying to reelect Trump. But how far do you think they're going to go? And is time running out for them now with the election so close?
Yeah, so I think Russia is going to find itself in a very difficult situation, and I in certain regards, I think they're kind of all in on the strategy. They're at least looking for two primary objectives here. The first primary objective is help President Trump get reelected, because he's been such a boon in advancing Russian interests, basically undermining U.S. alliances, undermining NATO, kind of undermining the credibility of the Western liberal democratic order as led by the United States, creating space for kind of this alternative authoritarian vision of how the world should look that both the Russians and Chinese kind of share. So that's the first thing. And what's interesting is that while the Russians want Trump to have another 4 years, the Chinese do not. As a matter of fact, they would probably not be helping Trump, who they think is not that he's been hard. He's just been very unstable and they're unpredictable, and it's hard to kind of orient a foreign policy in a particular direction. They absolutely believe that he's been instrumental in America's decline. The Chinese definitely believe that, but they're probably on opposite sides of kind of the issue here, because the unpredictability could lead to some sort of catastrophic miscalculation or accident, and they don't need that. But getting back to Russia, the second thing that they're looking for is, frankly, just to cast doubt on credible elections. And the president has done far more damage than the Russians can do. The Russians are kind of like, some sort of increment to advance this notion, some sort of crumb or kernel of data that supports this notion that the U.S. elections have been interfered with and undermines the kind of the potential outcome, especially if it's close. If it's a blowout against Trump, then it's going to be hard to make this case. But if it's close, it might give the president enough room to really challenge this in the courts. So they're looking to create that kind of doubt, create that kind of space. I also think that in general, the Russians are keen on interfering in U.S. elections and undermining the credibility of our democracy and how our democracy functions. So that's kind of a part B to that second objective. There are probably other things that they're keen on doing. I can tell you from a technical standpoint, it is not easy. I mean, they would have to be. The U.S. government has actually invested pretty heavily in terms of hardening elections. In spite of the fact that the president has denied the fact that there was election interference, the rest of the federal government has been oriented on hardening elections and ensuring that they are executed as intended by officials, U.S. officials. So what you potentially have is enough data out there to cast doubt, not enough data to create any real harm. We have a very 50 states, 50 different ways of running elections, and they would have to be really, really precise, targeting the couple of districts that might be particularly meaningful. But I don't know if I would give them too much credit in that regard. I think they have these macro objectives that they're operating on.
I want to get to viewer questions, and the first question flows very naturally out of what you were just talking about. Gary asks, what should be the policy of the next administration towards Putin and Russia?
So that's I think a lot of people have spent time considering this. I think certainly there is going to have to be a reckoning with regards to election interference, and that reckoning could take many different forms. This administration has actually been relatively consistent, at least early on, not so much recently, but the first couple of years has been relatively consistent in levying sanctions, but those on Russia for all sorts of malign influence and aggression against U.S. interests and ally interests. So I think some of those things will continue, but they're obviously proven to be not ineffective, not enough. The Russians have actually been more aggressive. They put bounties on U.S. soldiers, unprecedented attacks against U.S. directly, things that they would not have considered in the past. They would do it in a place.
You think the intelligence on the bounties is solid?
I think it's credible enough. I think it probably is pretty solid. The reason I could say that is, even before this, and there's been wide reporting on this, the Russians have been pretty have rendered significant support to the Taliban. So this is not a big leap. The big leap is the fact that they're willing to attack U.S. interests and the risk. Normally there would be a high risk associated with that. Major response. This administration is not willing to do that, so the risks are low, and they could do that. But to answer Gary's question, I think we're going to have to start looking at some other tools. And if the Russians are so keen and interested in internal interference in domestic affairs in the U.S. and Europe, they should be prepared for kind of a similar response. Their claims of color revolutions promoted by the U.S. or the West, they're completely false. We actually we don't really do that. We don't do that. So they might need to be prepared for that if they want to continue to play this game. More costs.
Martin asks a couple of more personal questions, which I find kind of interesting. One is, did you encounter anti-Semitism during your career in the military? And the other one is, it seems that Trump has considerable support among Russian immigrants to the U.S. What do you attribute that to? Clearly, these are two Russian immigrants right here who do not support Trump, but it's true that quite a few of them do seem to, including some of my own relatives. Why is that?
So maybe I'll start with the second question. I think the Russians have been so there's a normal natural propensity, I think, for older immigrant community to be very conservative. Anything that smacks remotely of socialism or can be claimed as such is going to get a very strong negative response. But that doesn't explain the entirety of why the Russian immigrant community behaves like this. The bottom line is that the Russians actually have and again, there's reporting that many people might not know on this in the public space, but the Russians have been pretty savvy of leveraging expats, immigrant communities, not just the United States, but Israel, and frankly, any place where you could find a Russian citizens, Germany also, and kind of bombarding them with this kind of disinformation that has easy and natural purchase towards a community that believes, in the kind of the hazard of slipping into socialism or communism. So that's, and I think just like your family, my family is also, at least, for a while before I became a target of it, they were open and supportive of President Trump. That's no longer the case, and I think it's something that maybe it requires some leadership, maybe from folks like you and me and other emigres that have to do the kind of the spade work and reach out to these communities, as distasteful as it might be, to have those types of conversations. But those are conversations that might need to be had in order to shed light on this issue. Um, and it's interesting that in spite of the fact that this community actually is really well versed in the art of propaganda, living it, they still kind of take spoonfuls of it, uh, you know, without turning away. With regards to whether I've suffered bias, I would say that I was an officer, so that's not really conducive to people trying to be racist towards me, because I would not hold back in terms of making corrections, whether it's up the chain of command, which I never really experienced, or down the chain of command. There was at least one occasion where somebody said something, without really thinking about it, and I just made a correction. But that's, again, it's representative of backgrounds where people originate from. Surprisingly, there are parts of this country where there are no Jews. That I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me, but there are parts of the country where there are not there's not a large Jewish population. So stereotypes kind of are pretty much the only way people kind of understand Judaism. But I don't think I'd been the target of racism or bias per se. Not that really that I'm aware of. Only in the kind of the general sense that you have, again, representative of the country, you have a pretty conservative officer cohort with a lot of devout Protestant folks, and maybe they might kind of look more favorably on people that look similar, but not kind of explicit bias, maybe just implicit or behind the scenes. But the army is pretty good about the army and the military is pretty good about not tolerating that kind of stuff, actually. So
I will say, having, I lived in this country since the age of 6, the only time I've really encountered any anti-Semitism has been since Trump came to office, and I get all these anti-Semitic tweets and emails and all this other garbage. He's really brought all the haters out of the woodwork.
right.
Let me ask another question here. I'm going to zigzag back to Trump and Putin because Igor asked an intriguing question. What do you think Trump and Putin talked about when there were no American note takers present, or there was one translator obviously always present, but then he confiscated the notes? So what do you think they were saying to each other?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. Yeah, I know the translator pretty well. Terrific person, and I don't think she would have tolerated kind of anything that smacked of kind of blatant criminality or something of that nature. But it's a problem. I mean, I think the fact is that more than likely topics of the president on his typical rants, and he does this like almost like a child, uh, about the kinds of abuse he feels like he's suffering from the media, or he's the victim of some sort of offense. I imagine that this was kind of like Putin salivating over the fact that the president was whining about being attacked for Russia collusion. That's what probably a lot of that. And then Putin, that's from the Trump side, and then from Putin's side, the looking for every opportunity to probably advance his own kind of interests and agenda. uh I don't know if I would say, I mean, my first day on the NSC was the day of the meeting in Helsinki, and my firsthand experience is that I wouldn't read too far into that. I would say, besides the president kind of not acting like a kind of an adult, a man, a leader, I think there was probably nothing particularly substantive on it, because again, I was implementing some of these things, and they were totally kind of relatively normal initiatives. um the problem, I would say, is the same thing I kind of addressed in the article I wrote with John Gans in the Times, is that I operate in the kind of the formal existing bureaucratic channel within the interagency. I work with my colleagues, but that is not necessarily the channel of kind of record, or the channel that actually is the meaningful channel, because people have come to understand that they could work around and reach out to the political actors and achieve basically what they want. I mean, the phone call, that 25th July phone call, was because Gordon Sondland decided that he was going to reach out to the chief of staff Mick Mulvaney at the time and schedule this phone call, even though John Bolton, praise or damn him, said no, I don't think this is a good idea. But you still have these alternate end runs around the way things are supposed to work. So I say that it's hard to understand all of the double dealing and all the kind of the bad deals that are out there, because it doesn't run through a normal process. The process has been corrupted, and it's going to get worse.
We have a number of questions about you personally, asking, and about your brother. There's a question asking, what's your brother doing now? There are questions about, are you weathering your retirement? Are you okay? There's also a couple of questions about if Joe Biden wins, could he bring you back into the military, promote you to colonel? Would you go back to the NSC perhaps as a civilian? So a lot of interest here from folks about your own personal future and that of your brother.
Well, I want to say thank you for all the support, frankly, that that this question implies, because I felt really an enormous amount of support throughout this process, with thousands of letters coming in, so I'm grateful for people taking an interest. Eugene's doing okay for the time being. I think in certain regards, I want to say that the legal community is trying to do the right thing while facing, and probably even the Army and the Department of Defense potentially, but facing significant headwinds. Right now at this moment, his promotion board had met in August, and he was expecting kind of results to find out whether he's going to be promoted in September. He hasn't received those yet. I have a feeling that Department of Defense is probably holding off on submitting this list on whether he's been promoted. More than likely he has, until after the election, at which point the president could kind of lash out, but he has bigger issues to deal with. So we'll see how things turn out. It's too early to say definitively. He has been the target of retaliation also. Some of these guys from the National Security Council reached out to try to harm his career, just to be malicious and cover up some wrongdoing. And the House is looking into whistleblower retaliation and ethical violations by NSA O'Brien. So we'll see. It's too early to say. With regards to my future plans, I'm okay. I am pursuing a doctorate at Johns Hopkins in international relations. I'm looking at great power competition. Same things I was basically working on, in the classified environment, but now looking to write kind of, for public consumption. And I'm looking at the questions that are most meaningful for us. How do we work? How do we deal with a Russia that's aggressive? How do we deal with a China that's aggressive in, a highly competitive 21st century kind of geopolitical environment? So that's fascinating to me, and I'm enjoying that. With regards to joining a future administration, I don't know. I've made a commitment to complete this program. That's going to be a couple of years. But if called to serve, I will have to consider that, because I could, like I said, I continue to think that my future holds service.
Well, we have a couple of minutes left. I just want to give you a chance to say anything you want to say in closing before we sign off.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot of terrain here. I want to again thank David and Janice and you for providing this opportunity to share some views, and maybe again for those undecided out there, encourage them to go out and vote and tell their networks to vote. And I think we're facing a very, very perilous future if President Trump is reelected. If Mr. Trump is reelected and he has 4 more years, and that's really one of the reasons why I've been as vocal as I am. I'm not comfortable. If anybody's seen my wife speak, she's amazing. I mean, phenomenal. She's much more comfortable with that. I'm not.
You're not so bad yourself.
I'm not, and I
Very
really
eloquent.
prefer. Thank you. I prefer not to, but I feel like I have no choice, and I wouldn't. It would be hard to live with myself if I didn't do everything I could to protect this country.
Well, I think I speak for everybody on this program, and there's quite a few people, thousands of people. I think we're all united in admiration for your courage and heroism and speaking out and outrage at what you've had to suffer for serving this country, not just from our actual foreign enemies, but from our very own president and his henchmen in the White House. It's a disgrace what you've had to go through, but I have tremendous admiration for how you have stood firm under fire and have affirmed the very highest ideals of this nation and continue to serve this country even though you're no longer in uniform. So thank you, Alex, for a very enlightening and fascinating hour. And on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and community advocates, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. A reminder, the America at Crossroads series continues next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific with renowned political consultant David Axelrod, the architect of 2 Obama runs for the White House. So that's coming up, the next program. And on behalf of everybody here, and thank you very much for spending this hour with us. And I think we all got a lot out of it. And now we can turn to the probably much less edifying spectacle of the presidential debate coming up in a few minutes. And thank you to Janice and David and everybody else who put these programs together and do such an important job with Jews United for Democracy and Justice and community advocates. It's really an honor to be back here with all of you, and especially speaking to somebody that I admire as much as Alex. Thank you very much.